I felt the tug on my arm before I even realized what was happening. 1 second I was settled into my plush first-class seat. The next I was yanked forward, my journal clattering to the floor. "Come with us!" the gate agent snarled, his grip like iron. Cameras flashed. A veteran's shout echoed, "That's a kid! You can't do that!" My heart pounded, my breath caught, and I saw Sandra, the lead flight attendant, looming beside him, arms crossed, her face a mask of cold authority. "Tell us where you're watching from," because in just one call, everything changed. 2 hours earlier, I had walked onto this flight full of pride. Reagan National Airport. Early morning. The sky was a pale wash of dawn as I rolled my suitcase toward the jet bridge. Above me, the banner read "Wings for Veterans," honoring those who served. My pulse quickened. I was Jade Thompson, 16-year-old ambassador for the Voices of Valor series, boarding first class on a Skybridge Airways Boeing 787, completely free of charge, courtesy of my dad, Senator Adrian Thompson. I still remember the crackle of excitement in my chest. Inside the cabin, veterans in crisp uniforms clasped hands, adjusting their medals as they shared whispered stories. The steward greeted me with a salute-like nod. "Welcome aboard, Miss Thompson," he said, pressing a boarding pass, thick, embossed, into my hand. My seat, 3A, was a luxurious cradle of white leather. An amenity kit sat on the ottoman. Lavender-scented socks, a navy eye mask embroidered with the Wings logo, and a sleek journal labeled Voices of Valor. I nestled in, imagining how perfect it was, a sky-high gala to celebrate veterans, each of us floating above the clouds in gratitude. I slipped my phone into airplane mode. No mid-air selfies, no live streams. This was about genuine conversation. I shared a quiet smile with Mr. Hernandez, a retired Navy chief 2 rows back. "Thank you for being here," I told him. He patted my hand, eyes gleaming. "It's an honor because of you, Jade." The engines hummed to life, and the captain's voice crackled over the speakers. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard Flight 502 to Philadelphia. Please fasten your seatbelts as we taxi to the runway." I took a deep breath as the plane glided forward, the cityscape of DC shrinking behind us. Just when I thought the flight would be smooth sailing, everything flipped upside down. Back in 3A, I scanned the cabin for Sandra, the attendant who had welcomed me with a curt nod. She was whispering with the gate agent from DCA, Mr. Reynolds, his expression hard as flint. I frowned but stayed seated. Maybe they were checking documents? A routine security measure? Then Mr. Reynolds appeared at my side. He swiveled my way, voice low but firm. "Miss Thompson, we need to see your boarding pass again." My chest tightened. "Sure," I said, fishing it out. He took it, scanned it, and shook his head. "This ticket may be fraudulent," he said, handing it back like a weapon. "You're coming with us." Before I could protest, strong hands closed around my elbows, dragging me into the aisle. Shock rippled through the cabin. Whispers turned to gasps. My journal fell forgotten, pages fluttering like startled birds. I opened my mouth to speak, but my voice caught. Panic rose in my throat as I was shoved past horrified veterans and silent sponsors. I clung to decorum. No screaming, no crying. But inside, I felt my world fracture. It was the worst moment of my life, and it happened in less than 30 seconds. Tell us where you're watching from, because if you think that was intense, you haven't heard the rest. I stumbled into the galley, my hands shaking. Mr. Reynolds towered over me, Sandra blocking any path back. I knew that if I yelled, if I cried, they'd only accuse me of being dramatic, of resisting orders. Instead, I straightened my back and said, "I want to call my father." They exchanged a look. "No calls in flight," Sandra replied, voice icy. Linda Harrison, the lead attendant, stepped forward. Her eyes softened when they met mine. Without a word, she glanced at Mr. Reynolds, then slipped me a small piece of paper, the in-flight extension for corporate. Hope flared. I dialed with trembling fingers. The line clicked. I heard distant murmurs. "This is Linda Harrison, lead flight attendant on Flight 502, she said into the handset, keeping her voice calm. "I need to speak with Senator Thompson, now." In the aisle, cameras clicked and lights blinked. The plane taxied to a halt on the runway. The engines powered down. A hush fell, too strange for routine operations. Through the curtain, I heard the low rumble of confusion. Then, with no warning, the main cabin screens flickered on. My father's face appeared bigger than life. Silver-haired, resolute. His tone was crisp. "This is Senator Adrian Thompson. Effective immediately, Flight 502 is grounded. I'm freezing $600 million in federal grants to Skybridge Airways pending a full investigation under Section 214 of the Aviation Ethics Act. No airline in this country will avoid transparency. Report your conduct monthly to Congress or forfeit all funding." The cabin erupted. Applause. Cheers. The veterans rose, salute-like, their faces alight with vindication. Mr. Reynolds stepped back, white as the seat behind him, and Sandra's eyes filled with tears, of shame or regret. I couldn't tell. I sank back into seat 3A, chest tight but soaring. My heart pounded not with fear but pride. I'd done it. The one call had not only saved me, but ignited a chain reaction of justice, one that would echo through the halls of power and across every airline in America. Once, I was just a teenager boarding a charity flight. Now, I was the catalyst for real change. And that was only the beginning. I settled back into my window seat, 3A, tucking my journal and boarding pass into my lap. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the muted chatter of fellow passengers created a deceptively calm backdrop. But every time I glanced toward the curtain, I caught sight of him. Mr. Reynolds, the gate agent from DCA, lingering near the first-class entrance. He wasn't supposed to be on board. Gate agents usually stayed behind. But there he was, arms folded, eyes locked on me. I tried to focus on the steward delivering warm towels, the veterans exchanging quiet greetings, the faint scent of lavender from my amenity kit. Yet something about Mr. Reynolds' expression made my skin prickle. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something darker, an unspoken accusation in his gaze. Every few seconds, he cast another pointed look my way, like he was double-checking that I belonged here. I bowed my head to hide the flicker of unease. This was supposed to be my moment, my chance to honor veterans and share their stories. I reminded myself of my speech, neatly written in my journal's first pages. "Thank you all for your service. As a daughter of a senator and an ambassador for Voices of Valor, I'm humbled to stand alongside you." But my voice felt miles away. I glanced at the clock on the in-flight console. 15 minutes until takeoff. Plenty of time, technically, yet every second stretched like a tightrope beneath my feet. I forced a smile at the steward passing by, hoping my calm exterior would disarm whatever silent doubt Mr. Reynolds was harboring. Just then, the curtain fluttered back and Sandra appeared, delivering the final safety briefing cards. Her lips were pressed into a thin line. Her eyes skated over my face as she handed me the laminated card. "Miss Thompson," she said, almost too politely, "please review the safety instructions for takeoff." "Thank you," I replied, turning the card over in my hands. I traced the diagrams with my finger. Fasten your seatbelt, locate your exit row, and tried not to notice the way Sandra's gaze slid down to my sneakers and back up again. It felt like I was under a microscope. I slid the card back into its seatback pouch and took a steadying breath. In my mind, I rehearsed the words I'd use if he challenged me again. "My father booked this flight for me as a thank you gift. He's Senator Adrian Thompson. You can verify it with corporate." But I didn't want to sound arrogant, or to throw his name around like a shield. The engine spooled up, a low rumble that vibrated through the cabin floor. I reached for my journal, my security blanket, and opened to the blank page I'd set aside for observations. If I focused on writing, maybe my nerves would settle. Just then, a soft tap on my shoulder made me jump. It was Linda, the lead flight attendant. Her eyes were kind, but serious. "I'll be back in just a moment," she whispered, nodding toward Mr. Reynolds. who'd advanced a few steps closer. Linda's silent support gave me a small surge of courage. I managed a tight smile and set the journal aside. Linda stepped away. I watched her intercept Mr. Reynolds at the front galley, her lips moving in quiet words I couldn't hear. He shook his head, and she shrugged, an unspoken, "please trust me" gesture before she returned to her post. My stomach fluttered. What could they be saying? Was he still complaining about my ticket? Or worse, planning something more drastic? I pressed my palms flat against the armrests, willing myself to stay calm. A soft chime announced the turnoff of the mobile devices sign, our cue to stow laptops and phones. I clicked mine into airplane mode and slipped it into my pocket. Then the captain's voice came through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be taking off shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened and all carry-on items stowed." I felt the plane inch forward, and the gentle sway of taxiing underlined how high we already were, politely reminding me that we were all in this together, hurtling over pavement toward the open sky. I took one last look at Mr. Reynolds. He was still watching, arms crossed and jaw set. My pulse ticked up again. The takeoff roll began with a gentle surge of power. The nose lifted, and in a heartbeat we were climbing through bands of cloud. I gripped the armrests for a moment, feeling both exhilarated and anxious. Exhilarated because of the mission we were on. Anxious because I could sense I was still being judged. Within minutes, the seatbelt sign dinged off. A few passengers leaned back, stretching and exchanging quiet laughter, but I barely registered it. My heart was still racing. Then, glancing across the aisle toward the front of the cabin, I saw Sandra approach again, this time with Mr. Reynolds trailing behind her. She fanned out a small slip of paper in one hand. I could tell from her posture that she intended to hand it to me. My breath caught. If she was planning another check, I had to stay composed. I reached out and took the paper. It was a note. "Please present corporate confirmation at your earliest convenience. Thank you." I blinked, surprised. It wasn't a direct confrontation, more like a polite request, but the implication was clear. I still hadn't proven I belonged here. I folded the note and tucked it into my journal. Keeping my voice steady, I caught Sandra's eye. "Of course, I'll reach out to corporate right away." She nodded, expression unreadable, and turned to Mr. Reynolds. He gave me one last hard look, so sharp I felt it on my skin, and then left the cabin with a dismissive wave. Sandra watched him go, then offered me a small, sympathetic smile before moving on to serve tea. Relief and frustration tangled in my chest. Why wouldn't they just trust me? Why did I have to fight every step of the way? I closed my eyes and remembered why I came here, to honor veterans, to share their stories, to use this platform for good. I picked up my pen and wrote in the margin, "They see me, but they don't see me." The words felt heavy but true. By the time the flight attendants began the lunch service, I'd composed myself enough to interact normally. I selected the grilled chicken salad and added a sparkling water. As Sandra poured water into the glass, our fingers brushed. She paused mid-pour, looked up, and her eyes met mine, just for a moment. Then she set the bottle down and turned away. I settled into my seat and closed my journal, flipping ahead to the page reserved for stories from the sky. I asked myself, how would I tell this story later? How would I frame the moment when doubt flickered across every face but my own? I reminded myself that criticism and suspicion could sting, but they couldn't define me. I'd earned my place here, not because of my dad's influence, but because of my work with veterans. I'd stood beside men and women who faced real danger. This was nothing compared to that. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude, and the soft chime signaled the lavatory was open. I considered stretching my legs, but instead I stayed put, watching the clouds drift past my window. Each one looked like a promise, fleeting, beautiful, out of reach but always moving forward. I opened my journal one last time before lunch arrived and wrote a single sentence. Even when they doubt me, I will rise. No one else saw me write it, Just me and those silent, drifting clouds. And in that quiet moment, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. When lunch carts rattled down the aisle, the cabin fell into a hushed routine. Plates clacked, silver utensils gleamed, and soft murmurs drifted from seat to seat. I watched Sandra move methodically among the first-class rows, delivering meals with mechanical precision. Her navy uniform was immaculate, her posture perfect, and yet everything about her reminded me that I was still under scrutiny. She stopped at 1A to serve a businessman his lobster bisque without so much as a glance my way. Then she circled back and paused at 3B, offering a glass of champagne to a retired sergeant whose medals caught the light with every movement. Finally, she straightened and turned to me. Her expression was neutral, almost rehearsed. "Chicken or salmon, Miss Thompson?" she asked, holding up two menus like a dealer at a card table. I tucked my journal into my lap and offered a polite smile. "Grilled chicken, please," I said. Without another word, she selected the salad course and began arranging it on the fold-out tray table in front of me. She worked with rigid efficiency, folding the napkin with surgical creases, aligning the bread roll next to the plate, placing the butter dish just so. She snapped the tray table closed, gave me a curt nod, and swept away. I stared at the closed tray for a moment, heart hammering in my chest. The gesture itself was polite, but the absence of warmth stung more than any outright insult could have. It was as though she'd memorized a script for how to serve a VIP, but deliberately left out the courtesy that might remind me I was welcome. I forced a calming breath and set about unwrapping the napkin. The salad was bright with mixed greens, cherry tomatoes, and a delicate vinaigrette. It smelled fresh, almost cheerful, and I needed that normalcy. I took a bite and closed my eyes, letting the flavors ground me. As I chewed, I replayed our earlier interaction. In the galley, Mr. Reynolds had fumed when I'd insisted on calling my father. Sandra had remained silent then, but her silence had carried its own weight. Now, up here in first class, I could sense the barrier she placed between us. Every gesture kept me at arm's length. I glanced out the window to avoid looking at her again. Below, the patchwork fields of Pennsylvania stretched out like a quilt, stitched together by rivers and roads. The sky was a brilliant canvas of blue and white, streaked with contrails from other flights. It should have been inspiring, but I felt trapped in a bubble of cold indifference. I tucked into my chicken salad, nibbling at my confidence like a nervous traveler. A few seats down, a group of corporate sponsors chatted amiably with Linda, the lead flight attendant. Her presence there, quietly offering extra bread rolls and laughing at a veteran's quip, reminded me that kindness existed on this plane too. It just wasn't in Sandra's repertoire. I finished the salad and reached for my water glass. As I raised it, my elbow bumped the edge of the tray table. The glass clinked against the metal frame, and I froze, mortified by my own clumsiness. Sandra reappeared in an instant, her posture stiff. "Are you okay, Miss Thompson?" she said, voice clipped, but not with concern, more like an official inquiry. Yes, I'm fine," I murmured, lowering the glass and trying to straighten my napkin. She studied me for a beat, then gave a curt nod. "Let me know if you need anything else." She turned away, leaving me blinking after her retreating back. I realized, with a twist in my gut, that I had been waiting, hoping, for a single word of genuine empathy. Instead, I got a professional textbook version of service. It hurt more than any direct accusation. I pushed my salad plate aside and opened my journal. My pen hovered over the blank page reserved for cabin impressions. Instead, I wrote a single line. "She serves respect in portions too small to matter." The act of writing felt like exhaling a breath I'd been holding tight. Then the overhead speaker chimed softly. Linda's voice came through. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be dimming the cabin lights shortly for our in-flight tribute video. Please settle in, and thank you for your attention." Curiosity rippled through the cabin. A gentle hush fell as the ceiling lights faded to twilight. The video screen at the front flickered, and then displayed a montage of black and white footage. Soldiers boarding ships, medics tending to wounded comrades, pilots saluting the flag. A slow piano score underscored the images, and I felt a lump in my throat. I leaned forward, clasping the arms of my seat. "Jade," I reminded myself, "you're here to celebrate these heroes. You belong." I took a breath and allowed the emotion to wash over me. The video ended with a shot of a young veteran cradling his own child, the sun setting behind them. The screen read, "Wings for Veterans, Past, Present, and Future." The lights came back on, and Linda and the crew moved discreetly among us, encouraging applause. As I clapped alongside the others, I felt a surge of solidarity. For a moment, Sandra's chill seemed dwarfed by the warmth that filled the cabin. I glanced her way and noticed her lips quirked ever so slightly, perhaps a crack in her armor. Then Mr. Reynolds appeared again, at the galley entrance. He scanned the cabin, his gaze sliding past the veterans, stopping at me for just long enough to remind me that my vindication was still pending. My stomach clenched. I closed my journal and tucked it under my arm. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I reached into my bag and retrieved the corporate confirmation note Sandra had pressed into my hand earlier. Checking it felt like checking my pulse, real and urgent. Before I could open it, the flight attendant Eric passed with a tray of sparkling water bottles. As he pressed one into my hand, he paused and said quietly, "I'm sorry you're being treated this way." His words hit me like a balm. I looked up, startled. "Thank you," I whispered. He gave a small nod and moved on. I watched him glide down the aisle, thinking how remarkable it was that, even in the midst of coldness and suspicion, small acts of kindness still found their way to me. I folded the note and slid it into my journal. The sun, bright slashes of gold, glinted on the wingtip outside my window. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and exhaled. Tension leaked out of me with the breath, replaced by a quiet resolve. This cabin was a microcosm of the world I wanted to change. Some people wrapped in armor of indifference, others extending a hand of empathy. I'd already proven my worth through my work with veterans. Now I'd prove it to them. With that thought, I tapped my journal's binding and set it in my lap. The rest of the flight stretched ahead of me. Hours of cruising punctuated by more video segments, interviews, and perhaps another clash with Mr. Reynolds. I wasn't sure what would come next, but one thing was clear. I had survived a trial by ice, and now I was ready to thaw it with every ounce of truth and courage I possessed. And if that meant confronting more cold stares, I would do it. Because the stories that mattered here were bigger than one soldier's memory, bigger than one flight attendant's bias. They were about honoring the human spirit, even when it was buried beneath layers of doubt. I lifted my head, straightened my shoulders, and clicked open my journal. It was time to keep writing, both my story and theirs. I felt the knot in my stomach tighten when Sandra reappeared at my seat, this time accompanied by Mr. Reynolds himself. The glint of his DCA badge caught the cabin lights as he reached past the VIP curtain. "Miss Thompson," he said, voice low enough that only I could hear. "We need to see your boarding pass and photo ID again." A hush settled over my corner of first class. Veterans paused mid-bite. Corporate sponsors held their silverware in the air. And even Mr. Hernandez froze, his fork poised above his plate. I took a steadying breath, fishing my passport and the embossed boarding pass from my journal's pouch. My hands trembled, just slightly, but I forced myself to keep my face calm and neutral. Sandra leaned in, peering at the laminated card as if it bore invisible markings. "Where did you get this ticket?" she asked, raising an eyebrow in that familiar, insinuating way. "Who purchased it?" My father did," I answered, voice softer than I'd intended. "Senator Adrian Thompson booked it as part of the Wings for Veterans campaign." Mr. Reynolds scowled. He flipped through the printed receipt I'd pulled from my bag. A hefty sheet bearing my father's name and the official Senate stationery. "The name on the credit card doesn't match the passenger name," he said, tone clipped. "We need proof you're related, or we'll have to move you to economy." A wave of humiliation rolled through me. My cheeks warmed as if they'd caught fire. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. I'm 17, I managed. I don't have my own credit card. My father's card was used. There's an email from him confirming everything. I tapped my journal's pocket where I'd stashed a screenshot of that email. He waved my words away. Screenshots can be faked. We need official parental consent on file. His gaze flicked toward a flight attendant's crew-only sign and then back to me. Or you disembark at the next stop. My pulse thundered. I glanced around at the wide-eyed onlookers. A retired Army colonel whose hands had bookmarked a memoir. A young tech executive pausing mid-conversation. A corporate sponsor checking his watch. The implication was clear. If I couldn't supply acceptable proof, I didn't belong in first class. Worse, I risked being forced off the plane like a criminal suspect. I clenched my jaw. My father had taught me never to let injustice go unchallenged, but also never to lose my composure. I drew in a measured breath. Please, I said, voice firmer now. Let me call my father. He can verify this in seconds. Absolutely not, Sandra snapped. No calls in flight. A murmur of dissent rippled through the cabin. I saw Linda Harrison intercept Mr. Reynolds with a gentle hand on his elbow. Sir, perhaps we can verify through corporate, she suggested quietly. Senator Thompson's office can confirm VIPs in minutes. Mr. Reynolds frowned, glancing at Sandra. We don't have time, he muttered. The flight's in progress. This is protocol. A surge of anger mixed with frustration swirled in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. This flight is part of a charity event, I said evenly. It's honoring veterans. Are we really going to derail the entire gala over a piece of paper? His lips tightened into a thin line. The rules apply to everyone. I looked out the window at the clouds drifting by. In those fluffy swirls of white, I saw veterans training for missions, ships slicing through ocean waves, cargo planes flying vital supplies. And here I was, accused of a crime I hadn't committed. I swallowed hard. I've done nothing wrong, I said softly, but everyone heard me. Mr. Reynolds sighed as if my words were an inconvenience. Either you present parental consent, he said, voice rising, or you're moving to coach. End of discussion. At that moment, a hand gently touched my forearm. It was Eric. He bent close, lowering his voice. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I wish I could help more. His empathy warmed me, a tiny beacon in the cold glare of doubt. I managed a small nod. Thank you. Eric pressed my arm before moving on, and I realized I wasn't entirely alone. Linda gave me a reassuring glance that said, I've got you, quietly. I offered her a grateful smile, and for a heartbeat, I felt a flicker of hope. But then Mr. Reynolds cleared his throat. He held out his hand, demanding my documents again. Hand them over. I slid the passport and boarding pass across his palm, feeling like I was handing over my own dignity. He examined them with almost comical scrutiny, chewing the inside of his cheek. Finally, he handed them back as if I were a deflating balloon. I'm not convinced, he said. You'll be escorted to the back in 5 minutes. A collective gasp rose from the cabin. I could almost taste the astonishment and dismay. A veteran nearby muttered, This is outrageous. Another passenger fumbled for his phone. I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst. But before he could signal his cronies, a soft chime sounded. The cabin screens flickered, and Linda's voice filled the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We have a situation that requires immediate corporate verification. Then the screen switched to a live video feed. Senator Adrian Thompson, framed by bookshelves and the seal of the United States Senate. Good morning, my father's voice resonated through the cabin. This is Senator Thompson. I understand a misunderstanding has arisen aboard Flight 502. Effective immediately, this flight is grounded on the runway. I am freezing all $600 million in federal aviation grants to Skybridge Airways, pending a full investigation under Section 214 of the Aviation Ethics Act. No airline in this nation will evade transparency, report your conduct monthly to Congress, or risk losing federal funding. The effect was electric. The cabin erupted. Applause. Cheers. Even tears, Mr. Reynolds's jaw dropped. Sandra's posture crumpled. I sank back into my seat, chest heaving with relief and pride. I looked into the faces around me, veterans saluting, sponsors wiping tears, Eric offering me a thumbs up. In that moment, I felt the weight of every doubt lift. I had defended my place with composure, and one call had vindicated me and honored those I was here to celebrate. The knot in my stomach was gone, replaced by a steady warmth. I picked up my journal and wrote a single line. Truth is the greatest veteran of all. And I knew, no matter what came next, I would face it head on, because justice, like flight, is born of courage. The moment Mr. Reynolds seized my arm, my world narrowed to a single, terrifying point of impact. One instant I was tucked into the soft contours of seat 3A, journal open on my lap. The next, my elbow jolted against the armrest as he yanked me forward. Sandra appeared at his side, her grip on my other arm cold and unyielding. "Miss Thompson, you need to come with us now," Mr. Reynolds barked, his voice low but carrying through the hushed first-class cabin like an alarm. Shock paralyzed me for half a heartbeat. Then, all at once, adrenaline surged. I planted my feet, digging heels into the plush carpet, and forced myself to meet his eyes. I'm not going anywhere," I said, voice barely steady. "You still haven't given me a valid reason." The aisle was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 sets of wheels to pass. As Sandra and Mr. Reynolds pressed in on either side, I felt the press of polished leather seats and the gaze of nearly 100 passengers. A retired colonel beside me gasped, pushing his reading glasses up onto his forehead. A young couple 2 rows back fumbled to lower their coffee cups. Even the low hum of the engine seemed to fade, replaced by the taut silence of collective disbelief. I tried to twist free. "Let go of me," I whispered, but it came out a strangled plea. My journal slipped from my lap, fluttering to the floor like a wounded bird. Cameras popped up, phones and tablets capturing every moment, as veterans and sponsors alike strained to see what was happening. "Don't resist," Mr. Reynolds growled. He jerked me again, and pain flared in my shoulder where his grip dug in. For a second, all I could taste was the metallic tang of fear. Then something inside me snapped. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every veteran on this plane, every sponsor who believed in our cause, every person who'd ever been shoved aside because someone decided they didn't belong. I lifted my chin. "You're humiliating me," I said, voice stronger now, echoing off the cabin walls. "You're embarrassing every veteran you're supposed to honor." The words hit the gate agent like a splash of cold water. He stiffened, and for a fraction of a second, I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. But Sandra's hand tightened on my wrist, and his resolve hardened again. They dragged me 3 or 4 steps down the aisle, past rows of stunned faces. I caught sight of Linda in the galley doorway, her jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. Eric hovered behind her, his eyes wide and conflicted. I wanted to scream at him, "Help me!" But I kept my mouth shut, thinking of my dad's advice. Stay calm, stay composed. Let truth be your weapon. At the first-class divider, they paused. Mr. Reynolds glanced back at the captain's barrier. "If you make another scene, I'll have to call air marshals," he threatened. "Call them," I said, leaning forward so he could hear me. "Because you'll have an entire cabin full of witnesses testifying against you." A murmur of agreement rippled through the seats behind me. Someone whispered, "She's right." Another passenger lowered a phone. The flash of a tiny red recording light winked at me from 2A. My heart thudded, not with fear, but with fierce pride. I wasn't alone. Sandra hesitated, her arm poised between helping Mr. Reynolds and releasing me. Then, with a stiff nod, she stepped back, as though realizing that cruelty would only add fuel to this fire. Mr. Reynolds huffed and released my arm. I staggered slightly but caught myself, eyes blazing. I retrieved my journal from the carpet, flipping it shut with a snap that sounded louder than the overhead bins. "I won't forget this," I said, voice calm but icy. and neither will they. He gave me one last glare, a mixture of rage and something like regret, then turned on his heel and stalked backward into the galley with Sandra close behind. The cabin erupted in quiet applause and relieved sighs. Veterans straightened medals that had rattled in the commotion. Sponsors exchanged nods of solidarity. Linda rushed forward to offer me a hand. I accepted it, and she guided me back to my seat. "You did great," she murmured. "Just breathe." I slid into 3A and buckled my seatbelt, exhaling a breath I didn't know I was holding. Around me, the first-class cabin felt transformed. From a gilded cage of suspicion to a community bound by outrage and respect. I pressed my forehead to the cool window pane. Below, a blanket of clouds stretched out like a promise of better days. My journal thumped against my thigh, as though reminding me to record every detail. I smiled grimly. The flight still had hours to go, and I knew there would be more challenges ahead. But in that moment, I realized how powerfully one person's dignity and the courage to defend it could ripple through a crowd. The pain in my shoulder pulsed, but it was nothing compared to the fire igniting in my chest. I reached into my journal's inner pocket, found the corporate verification note, and tucked it safely away. Because now, I wasn't just a passenger who'd been dragged. I was the one who refused to let injustice win. And the moment I closed that divider curtain, I knew the true battle had only just begun. I settled back into 3A, my shoulders still throbbing from the tug, but my pulse steadying with each breath. Around me, the first-class cabin buzzed, not with flight attendant efficiency, but with a new current of solidarity. I looked up at the rows of seats, catching glimpses of veterans exchanging knowing glances, corporate sponsors offering quiet nods. Even the silver-haired man in 1A was tapping out a text on his phone, presumably sending footage to someone who could help. At the front of the cabin, I spotted Linda Harrison leaning against the galley frame, her arms folded not in judgment, but in support. Eric hovered nearby, twisting his cap in his hands. Their eyes met mine, hers calm and resolute, his apologetic but determined. In that moment, they became more than crew members. They were allies. A retired Army sergeant 2 rows ahead cleared his throat. "You okay, Miss Thompson?" he asked, voice low but firm. He'd fought in Afghanistan. I'd interviewed him last month about his tour. His respect for my Voices of Valor project was genuine. I managed a small smile. "Thanks to you, I am." He nodded and patted the seat beside him. "We've got your back." The gesture was simple, a backslap of solidarity, but it filled me with a warmth that outshone the cabin lights. I glanced at my journal lying open on the tray table, a blank page inviting me to capture this moment. My pen hovered for a heartbeat, then I sighed and closed the cover. This wasn't about words. It was about feeling that I wasn't alone. Linda moved down the aisle, quietly instructing Eric to bring me a fresh glass of water. He returned a moment later, sliding into the space beside me with a gentle clink of ice against glass. "Here," he said, offering the tumbler. "On the house." I took the glass, resting my hand on his for a second. "Thank you, Eric." He nodded, cheeks pink under his uniform brim. "I'm sorry about earlier. I should have spoken up." "You did," I replied. "You're here now." He gave me a shy grin and melted back into the aisle, moving on to check on other passengers. I watched him go, feeling a swell of gratitude. The cabin no longer felt like a courtroom. It felt more like a community. A hush fell as Linda stepped forward, clearing her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, using the PA system but keeping her voice gentle. "If I may have your attention." Heads turned. Veterans lowered newspapers. A sponsor set aside his tablet. "We've been through an unusual situation, but I'm moved by the way each of you has shown respect for Miss Thompson and for the spirit of Wings for Veterans. Your support embodies the very values we're here to honor: dignity, courage, and care." A ripple of applause rose, soft but sincere. I blinked back tears. This was the validation of everything I'd hoped for. A silent army of ordinary people rising up for one young woman who'd done nothing more than claim her place. Linda continued, "We ask that you remain at your seats for a few more minutes as our captain verifies some details. Thank you for your patience and for standing up for what's right." She stepped away, exchanging a grateful nod with me before returning to the galley. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, and the gentle hum of conversation resumed. But now it carried an undercurrent of shared purpose. I watched Mr. Hernandez across the aisle, the retired Navy chief who'd once described Pearl Harbor in vivid detail. He leaned over, his metal cluster reflecting soft light. "We're proud of you," he said quietly. "Don't let them tell you otherwise." I closed my eyes and let the words sink in. Over the past hour, I'd gone from shock and humiliation through outrage and struggle to this moment of collective compassion. I'd felt small when they first accused me. Now I felt part of something bigger, a wave of decency cresting above prejudice. I opened my eyes to find the screen at the front flickering on. A familiar blue and white Senate seal appeared, and the cabin stirred again. Senator Thompson's face filled the screen. Calm, authoritative, proud. He spoke, "Thank you, Linda. And thank you, Skybridge passengers, for your patience. Our investigation will proceed immediately. Miss Thompson, your courage reminds us that integrity must guide us always." He offered a quick nod and the screen went dark. Linda let out a breath and turned to me, eyes glistening. "You did it," she said softly. "I couldn't have done it without you all," I replied, gesturing to the cabin. She smiled, then stepped away to help another passenger. I watched her go, struck anew by the strength in her quiet leadership. Eric reappeared, offering me a small package of flavored almonds. "Something to snack on," he said. I accepted it gratefully. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your cooperation. We'll resume our flight in just a moment." Again, apologies for the delay. The seatbelt sign flicked off, and I leaned back, stretching my shoulders. The cabin's atmosphere had shifted from confrontation to camaraderie. Strangers who'd once averted their eyes now exchanged sympathetic smiles. I caught a sponsor's gaze and we gave each other a thumbs up, no words needed. I reached into my bag and retrieved my phone, out of airplane mode now. The screen was flooded with notifications, messages of support from friends, emails from local news outlets, even a text from my father saying, "I saw everything, proud of you." My heart swelled. This wasn't just a family affair anymore. It was a movement. The Voices of Valor series had always been about sharing veterans' stories, but today I'd become part of one. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes, letting the plane's gentle thrum lull me. In those quiet moments, I felt a profound sense of belonging. To my family, to the veterans, and to the newfound community above the clouds. When I finally opened my eyes, the sun was dipping low, painting the wingtip in gold. I picked up my journal and wrote a single sentence on the next blank page. "Solidarity is the true measure of respect." And as we soared onward to Philadelphia, I knew that no matter what lay ahead, I had discovered a power far greater than any injustice, the power of people standing together. I tucked my journal into my bag, hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped my boarding pass again. The tension in the cabin had shifted from solidarity back to silent anticipation. Everyone knew what was coming next. I glanced at Mr. Reynolds, who was pacing near the galley, jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. Sandra hovered beside him, arms crossed, as if patenting her victory. But this time, I wasn't the one on the defensive. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the power button. Airplane mode was on, but Linda had slipped me a slip of paper with the in-flight corporate extension. I pressed the button, watched the screen flicker, and dialed the number, my throat closing around each breath. The ringing tone echoed in my ear. Beep, beep, beep. Seconds felt like minutes. I could hear the low murmur of passengers around me, the hum of the air conditioning, the distant clink of silverware from 2C. And still the line rang. Then a click. "Corporate desk," A calm female voice answered. "Hi," I managed, voice tight. "This is Jade Thompson on Flight 502, First Class, Seat 3A. Senator Adrian Thompson requested an immediate verification. Can you connect me to him?" There was a pause, and I held my breath. The entire cabin seemed to exhale and then freeze. Then the voice returned. "One moment, please." Silence. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at the window, imagining ground far below. Cities, rivers, highways streaming past in miniature. I tried to steady my thoughts. "You've rehearsed this." Dad will answer. "You belong here." But doubts darted through my mind. What if he's in a meeting? What if corporate desk can't reach him? What if someone just ignores me? My eyes flicked to Linda, standing a few feet away. She caught my gaze and offered a small, encouraging nod. It grounded me. I wasn't alone. The line clicked again. A new voice said, "Senator Thompson's office. How can I help you?" "It's Jade," I whispered. "Please, connect me to Dad. I need him to confirm my ticket and oversee the situation." I heard soft typing, then a murmur of, "Thompson." My pulse raced. "Hold on," the assistant said. "I'm patching you through." The phone was silent for another heartbeat, long enough that panic tried to seep back in. Then the familiar warmth of my father's voice. "Jade? Is that you?" "Dad," I exhaled, relief and urgency colliding in my chest. "They're threatening to move me to coach. Or worse, remove me at the next stop. They say my ticket is fraudulent." He growled softly, as though I could feel his anger through the line. "I saw the videos. I'm on my way to a meeting, but I'll be there tonight. Let me handle it. Right now, I need you to stay calm." His tone was fierce, but grounding. Tears stung my eyes, but I forced them back. "They won't let me prove it. They want parental consent on file." "Understood," he said, voice firm. "I'm freezing the $600 million in federal grants to Skybridge. I'm invoking Section 214. Airline ethics compliance reporting starts today. Flight 502 is grounded until everyone confirms your status. No one will touch you, I promise." The cabin light changed, an announcement dinged, and the engines idled mid-cruise. I realized the plane had come to a complete stop at altitude. Gasps rose around me, then cheers as passengers saw the wingtip lights blinking differently. I closed my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, kiddo," he replied. "I'll talk to you soon." The line went dead, and I pressed the phone to my chest, feeling the rapid beat of my heart slow into steady triumph. I lifted my head and allowed a genuine smile to break free. All around me, first-class seats were erupting in applause. Veterans saluting, sponsors clapping. Even Mr. Reynolds stepping back in stunned silence. Sandra's lips trembled as she watched the glow on the monitor switch to an official message. "Flight 502 grounded by Senate mandate. Further orders pending." I exhaled, leaning back into my seat. The weight of anxiety lifted. In its place bloomed a quiet, fierce confidence. I had stood my ground, and one decisive call had turned the tide. My journal lay open on my tray. I reached for my pen and wrote in bold letters across the page. "Decision of life or death. Stayed calm, made the call." Because right then I understood. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the choice to act despite it. And that choice had made all the difference. Linda returned a few moments later, phone in hand, her expression a blend of determination and relief. "We're live," she whispered, guiding me to stand near the galley door. My heart thundered as I stepped forward, every veteran's gaze and every phone camera trained on me. The cabin lights dimmed for a brief moment, then brightened under the soft glow of the galley fixtures. Eric hovered at Linda's side, ready to help. I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear and swallowed, trying to steady my voice. Linda held the handset to her ear. "Senator Thompson, we have your daughter on board. She's standing by." She handed me the phone. My breath caught. I pressed the receiver to my ear, and for a second, I simply stared at the cabin around me. Rows of attentive faces, the distant shimmer of clouds against the window. Then I heard it, the low click of a transferred line, followed by my father's unmistakable tone. "Jade?" "Hi, Dad," I said, voice trembling but clear. "It's me." A ripple of hushed excitement swept the cabin. I clutched the phone tighter. My father's voice carried both warmth and authority. "I'm here," he said softly. "Tell me what's happening." I took a deep breath. "They've accused me of using a fraudulent ticket. They won't accept my boarding pass or my ID without parental consent on file. They want to move me to coach or even remove me at our next stop." He sighed, anger and sympathy mixing in his words. "I understand. Thank you for holding on. I'm freezing the $600 million in federal aviation grants to Skybridge and invoking Section 214 for immediate ethics compliance reporting. Flight 502 is grounded until they confirm your status. No one touches you." I blinked back tears of relief. "Thank you, Dad." "Stay right there," he said. "I'll handle the rest from here." Linda reached over and squeezed my arm. Eric offered me a reassuring nod. The cabin lights shifted again as the pilots cut the engine's hum mid-cruise. A collective gasp rose, followed by scattered applause. I pressed the phone to my chest. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you too, kiddo," he replied. "Be safe." The line went dead. I tucked the phone back into my pocket, feeling the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. The veterans clapped, some rising from their seats in salute. Sponsors cheered. Even Mr. Reynolds and Sandra hovered at the divider, faces pale and humbled. Linda stepped forward into the aisle. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Skybridge Airways and Senator Thompson, thank you for your patience. We will resume our flight shortly under new directives." I settled back into 3A, the throb in my shoulder replaced by a warm glow of vindication. I glanced around at the cabin. The very community I'd feared was against me now, standing beside me. Pulling my journal from my bag, I wrote a single line on the connectivity page. "In flight, connection means power." And as the plane gently lifted back into its path, I realized that this moment, this one call, had harnessed more than my father's authority. It had harnessed the collective will of every person on board who believed in justice. The cabin lights flickered, and then every screen lining the first-class cabin sprang to life at once. Against the soft hum of the engines, Senator Adrian Thompson's voice filled the space with unexpected authority. "Good afternoon, passengers of Flight 502, his image began. Tall, silver-haired, standing before the Senate seal. "This is Senator Adrian Thompson. I've been informed of the events unfolding on board regarding my daughter, Jade Thompson. Effective immediately, Flight 502 is grounded on the runway. I am freezing $600 million in federal aviation grants to Skybridge Airways pending a full investigation under Section 214 of the Aviation Ethics Act. Further, I'm directing that every U.S. carrier submit monthly ethics compliance reports to Congress, beginning today." A ripple of stunned silence swept the cabin. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, like a dam breaking, cheers and applause erupted on all sides. Veterans rose from their seats, many saluting. Corporate sponsors stood, clapping and stamping their feet. The steward at 1A nearly knocked over a champagne flute in his excitement. Even those who had been skeptical earlier, passengers in business suits and wives in silk scarves, welled with emotion and joined in. My heart pounded so fiercely I could feel it behind my eyes. I pressed a hand to my chest, as though anchoring my still-beating ribcage to reality. Mounted screens showed my father's serious, unwavering gaze. In that moment, he wasn't a distant figure in Washington. He was here, on my side, a father defending his child and a lawmaker protecting every passenger's dignity. I looked down at my hands, trembling with a mix of relief and triumph. The weight I'd carried since the first accusation, the panic, the shame, the testing of my own worth, lifted all at once. It was like being pulled from dark water into bright sunlight. Across the aisle, Mr. Hernandez's weathered face beamed. "Well done, Miss Thompson," he said, his voice thick with pride. I managed a nod and a shaky smile. In that glance, I felt recognition. Not pity, but respect. Sandra hovered at the divider, her lips pressed together, eyes glistening. She met my eye for a fraction of a second, an unspoken apology passing between us. There was no need for words. The screens had said it all, and her conscience whispered it too. The cheers died down, and Linda took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice warm, "on behalf of Skybridge Airways and Senator Thompson, thank you for standing with us. We will resume our flight shortly under new directives. Please remain seated and enjoy the remainder of our service." As she stepped away, applauding passengers returned to their places, but the energy in the cabin had shifted permanently. There was an undercurrent of solidarity now, a shared understanding that power can protect the powerless, and that dignity isn't negotiable. I sank back into seat 3A, pressing my journal into my lap. My eyes drifted to the plateau of clouds beyond the window. Endless, luminous, unshakable. I opened the journal and wrote, "One call changed everything. Truth takes flight." A fresh wave of applause broke out when the engine softly roared back to life. The captain's calm voice followed. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back aboard. We'll be departing momentarily. Thank you for your patience." I braced for takeoff, feeling the gentle lurch of acceleration. As we lifted, I closed my eyes and allowed tears of relief to fall. Then I released a breath so deep it felt like exhaling fear itself. Around me, first-class passengers resumed hushed conversations, some replaying clips, others trading contact info for follow-up interviews. A young entrepreneur offered to help me build a veterans scholarship fund. The retired sergeant pressed a business card into my hand. "Call me if you need anything." I smiled through my tears, overwhelmed by the kindness and conviction of strangers. They hadn't just witnessed my vindication. They'd become part of my story, proof that justice, when wielded with compassion, can unite us all. As we soared toward Philadelphia, I closed my journal and leaned back, letting the memory of that moment settle into my bones. I knew I'd carry it forever. The sight of my father's face on every screen, the roar of approval from the cabin, and the knowledge that standing firm in truth can lift us higher than any flight ever could. The hum of applause rippled through first class like a standing ovation in a concert hall. Veterans saluted, leaning forward in their seats. Corporate sponsors rose, clapping and stamping their feet. Even the somber sky outside felt brighter. In that moment, the cabin transformed from a place of tension into a theater of vindication. I straightened in my seat, shoulders back, chin lifted. Every doubt I'd ever felt, the suspicion in Mr. Reynolds' eyes, the cold efficiency of Sandra's service, fell away under the spotlight of collective support. My father's mandate had done more than ground the plane. It had grounded the prejudice itself. Mr. Reynolds stood rooted at the front, surrounded by his fellow crew members. His DCA badge glinted against his uniform, but the authority it once symbolized was gone. He looked smaller now, diminished by his own actions. Sandra hovered beside him, cheeks flushed, her normally immaculate posture slumped in quiet shame. I caught her eye for a moment, and she offered the faintest nod, a silent acknowledgement that she'd been in the wrong. Linda Harrison emerged from the galley, wiping her hands on her apron. She paused at the divider and raised her voice. "Thank you, everyone. Your response today embodies the respect and dignity this flight and this airline stands for." She turned to me, offering a warm smile that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "You showed extraordinary courage, Miss Thompson." I stood, brushing imaginary dust from my uniform and offering a nod of gratitude. "Thank you, Linda, and thank you all for believing in what's right." A retired colonel in 1C, his medals glinting like constellations, stood and saluted me. "We're proud of you, young lady," he said, voice firm but kind. You reminded us why we served." His words resonated deeper than any official decree. I felt a surge of affection for this cabin full of strangers who had become my allies in a moment of crisis. Eric approached, his cap in hand. "Can I get you anything? Water? Tea?" he offered. I shook my head with a small smile. "Just knowing you care is enough." He nodded and moved on, leaving me with the warmth of his sincerity. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience and cooperation. We're cleared for departure and will be climbing through clear skies shortly." A ripple of applause followed, more subdued this time, an undercurrent of relief and unity. As the seatbelt sign dipped, I watched the servers resume their duties with genuine smiles, offering coffee and dessert with a kindness they'd withheld earlier. The cabin felt lighter, every gesture infused with respect rather than protocol. I sank back into my seat and placed a hand over my journal, feeling its reassuring weight. My heart still raced, but now it was energized. Not by fear, but by the power of truth and solidarity. Around me, passengers whispered about ethics reforms and legislation. A sponsor 2 rows down tapped away on his phone, scheduling a broadcast segment about airline practices. I opened my journal to a fresh page and wrote, "Justice isn't just a law, it's the will of the people, rising up in unison." Outside, the wings sliced through the clouds, carrying us forward. In the cabin, eyes shone with hope and determination. And I, once the accused, now the emblem of rightful strength, felt more at home in first class than ever before. The cabin lights dimmed again, this time gently, as the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be cruising at 35,000 feet for the remainder of our journey. Thank you for your cooperation." A few moments later, the hush of conversation returned, but something fundamental had shifted. What had begun as a tense standoff in first class was now the spark for a systemic transformation in aviation ethics, one that would outlast our flight and echo long after we landed. I leaned back in my seat, tracing the embossed Wings for Veterans logo on my journal. Outside the window, puffs of cloud drifted by, serene and unhurried. Inside, the cabin buzzed with conversations about Section 214 of the Aviation Ethics Act, the law my father had invoked. I listened as a group of sponsors and veterans hashed out the details. "It's incredible," said the retired Navy captain across the aisle, his gray crew cut catching the overhead glow. "Monthly ethics compliance reports? That'll force every airline to scrutinize their crew training, passenger interaction, even hiring practices." A corporate sponsor, a media executive, nodded, tapping at his tablet. "Investors are already watching. They'll demand transparency. No more hiding bias incidents in back rooms. We'll see real accountability." Their words settled over me like the first soft fall of snow. Quiet, inevitable, covering everything in a new light. I remembered how I'd felt just hours earlier, powerless, humiliated, dragged from my seat like a criminal. Now I felt powerful in a way I'd never anticipated. Not because of my father's office, but because the entire cabin, and soon the entire industry, had chosen to stand behind the principle of respect. I opened my journal and wrote in bold letters across the top of a blank page, Section 214, Ethics in Action. Below, I sketched the key points. Grounding for inquiry. Every airline must halt any flight if a credible report of discrimination or abuse emerges on board. Monthly reporting. Airlines submit detailed logs of passenger complaints, crew complaints, and resolution outcomes to Congress. Training and certification. Flight and ground crews undergo quarterly ethics workshops, with certifications published online. Public transparency. All ethics reports become public records, subject to media and investor scrutiny. As I wrote, I felt the gravity of each bullet point. These weren't abstract regulations. They were safeguards for every traveler. They meant that no one, no matter how junior or unassuming, could be shoved aside or silenced without triggering a chain reaction of accountability. A soft tap on my tray table drew my attention. It was Linda, carrying 2 espresso cups. She handed one to me and took a seat across the aisle. "Mind if I join you?" she asked with a warm smile. "Not at all," I said, cradling the small ceramic cup. The rich aroma of espresso grounded me. "Thank you for everything, Linda. I can't imagine how tense this must be for you, too." She shrugged, meeting my gaze with steady eyes. "I'm proud of how the passengers responded. And I'm proud of you. You showed what it means to hold firm to your dignity." She paused, then said softly, "Change like this doesn't happen often, but today, you made it happen." Her words felt like a benediction. I took a sip of espresso and let the warmth spread through me. Here was the moment where personal courage intersected with institutional reform, and I had played a role. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, listening to the quiet murmur of the cabin. Veterans whispered about how they'd share this story at reunions. A blogger in 2A jotted notes for a post titled, "How One Teen Sparked an Aviation Revolution." Flight attendants moved more freely now, their smiles genuine instead of guarded. I closed my journal and tucked the pen into its loop. Turning to Linda, I asked, "Do you think this will stick? Will airlines follow through?" She leaned back, folding her arms. "People will watch, investors will watch, the public will watch, and the FAA will enforce. I think this time, it's going to stick." I nodded, comforted by her certainty. Then I looked out the window at the endless sky. I thought of Mr. Reynolds and Sandra. Their faces, once so rigid, had softened under the weight of accountability. I thought of the veterans, their quiet dignity shining through the chaos. I thought of Eric, who'd stood by me in his own gentle way. And I thought of every stranger here who'd whispered, clapped, or simply met my eye with understanding. A new chapter of Voices of Valor was already taking shape in my mind. Not just the stories of who these heroes were, but the story of how respect, when demanded, when codified, could bring real, lasting change. I picked up my pen again and wrote a final line. "Justice isn't a moment, it's a movement." Then I closed the journal and pressed it to my chest. Above the clouds, we continued eastward. The engines hummed steadily, steady as determination. And in every quiet turn of the propeller, I could sense the world shifting, one flight at a time, toward a future where every passenger's dignity was as non-negotiable as the sky itself. The cabin lights brightened to their normal glow as the seatbelt sign clicked off one last time. Around me, passengers gathered their belongings, chatting animatedly about the evening's events. Veterans swapped contact info with sponsors, some already coordinating follow-up meetings in Washington. The energy was electric, a charged blend of relief, triumph, and a shared sense of purpose. I leaned back in 3A one final time, watching the last of the luggage carts glide down the aisle. My journal lay open on the tray table, pages filled with notes, quotes, and the regulations we'd sparked into life. Now, at the very end of this flight, I felt a pull to mark the closing of this chapter and the opening of the next. I picked up my pen and wrote at the top of the page, Chapter 12, From Flight to Future. Below, I sketched a quick outline. Video statement, thanking supporters, calling for industry-wide reforms. Private exit, Jade escorted through a private lounge by Officer Patel. Press conference, Senator Thompson standing by Jade's side. Epilogue. Reflection. Jade at sunrise, looking out, resolved to continue advocating. I closed the journal and stood, brushing off imaginary crumbs. Linda appeared at my side, handing me a hot espresso and a small plate of chocolate-dipped strawberries. "You earned it," she said softly. I smiled and accepted, savoring the warmth in my hands. "Thank you, Linda," I said, "for everything." She nodded. "I'll see you on the ground." At the door, Officer Patel greeted me with a respectful salute. "Miss Thompson, right this way," he said, leading me off the jet bridge and into a private lounge where a few security guards and a small press team waited behind barricades. Flash bulbs popped as I stepped into the velvet-roped area. A cameraman called out, Jade, can we get a statement? I took a breath. Of course. Clearing my throat, I spoke clearly into the microphone. Hello, everyone. I'm Jade Thompson. Today, we witnessed something powerful. The unity of people who refuse to let injustice stand. To every veteran, sponsor, and stranger who stood by me, you showed that respect isn't optional. I thank Senator Adrian Thompson for his swift action, and I call on every airline to adopt transparent ethics reporting and comprehensive anti-bias training. Our dignity belongs to us all. Let's honor it, always. I pressed play on a small tablet in my hand, which began streaming live to social media. The hashtags #Justice, Flight, and #Wings for Veterans lit up feeds around the world. Moments later, I was guided to a sleek black SUV where my father, Senator Thompson, stood waiting. His smile was warm as he enveloped me in a hug. "I'm so proud of you," he murmured. "Thank you, Dad," I replied, leaning into him. "But this isn't over. We've started something that matters." He nodded, his eyes misting with pride. "Together, we'll keep it going." As the SUV pulled away from the terminal, I watched the tarmac flash by. The city skyline of Washington, D.C. grew on the horizon, bathed in the soft pink and gold of sunrise. I reached for my journal, opening to a blank page. I wrote a single sentence. Every journey begins with a single flight. Then I closed it, looking out at the dawn. The world below was waking. Commuters, tourists, prisoners, dreamers, all carried forward by the same sky. And now I carried a story they could learn from. That courage can catalyze change, that dignity deserves defense, and that even one person's voice can echo through corridors of power. I tucked the journal into my bag and settled back into my seat, ready for whatever came next. The future was wide open, as vast and inviting as the endless sky above. Tell us where you're watching from and what you would have done if you were in Jade's shoes. Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you found this story inspiring, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss our next powerful tales.